Da 3 puntitos al fondo y a la derecha de su pantalla. Podrá hacer clic en estos o el icono de globo en el que se le aparecerá la opción de seleccionar un idioma y le invitamos a que escoja el idioma de su preferencia en el que quiera escuchar. Y si en algún momento el audio original es más fuerte que la voz del intérprete, en cualquier momento puede silenciar el audio original. So you will be able to access interpretation by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom right-hand side of your screen if you're connected through a computer, or on the 3 menu dots on the right-hand side if you're connected through a cell phone or tablet device. You'll be able to click on either of these and click on your language preference, so whatever language you feel most comfortable listening in. If at any moment the original audio sounds louder than the audio of the interpreter, then you can select mute original audio at any moment. If you have any issues with interpretation, please communicate them via the chat. Otherwise, this recording will be uploaded in Spanish after the event. Si usted tiene cualquier problema accediendo a la interpretación, lo puede comunicar a través del chat, o también esta grabación estará disponible en español después de este evento. Comenzaremos en unos segundos.
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the first webinar in our Know Your Rights series with Buen, Vecino and RISE Simi Valley. This is Know Your Rights, Navigating Encounters with ICE and Law Enforcement, co-sponsored by RISE and Buen, Vecino. And today we have an additional co-sponsor, CAIR California. Although this conversation may be directed towards our undocumented community, this webinar and series of webinars will be containing some essential information for all people regardless of immigration status. My name is Rootmon, and I will be hosting this webinar today. I'm the co-founder of RISE Simi Valley, and I'm really excited to be here with you all. Now we'll have the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rafael Torres. I'm an immigration attorney. I've been practicing in the field of immigration law for a number of years, since about the end of 2013. So the whole length of the Trump administration, which feels like it's probably 15 or 20 years. And it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I'm also the director of legal services of Buen Vecino, and I run my own law firm, which is located here in Simi Valley, called the Torres Law Firm. So thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Amina Fields. I'm an immigrant rights attorney at CAIR at the Greater Los Angeles office. We're located in Anaheim, but we provide immigration legal services throughout Southern California. I've been with CAIR for over 2.5 years, and prior to that, I was a private attorney focusing on immigration law in Washington. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this panel. Thank you. I want to also say thanks to RISE and Buen Vecino to allow CAIR to participate in this discussion.
Awesome. So some quick background. With the Biden administration taking office, we are expecting major changes in the immigration system. Although we can take a slight sigh of relief as this administration seems to be more friendly in terms of immigration, we still need to be wary about the current laws and how we should move forward. For example, we recently saw that Biden's 100-day moratorium on deportations was blocked by a judge. The information that we will go over in this webinar is extremely relevant now as it has ever been. Now for a short privacy disclaimer. The information provided should not be considered legal advice. This webinar is for educational purposes only. Please keep in mind that this webinar is public and therefore you should not share any private information about your specific case or situation. In this webinar, we will be covering navigating ICE and law enforcement in 3 different scenarios. We want to make sure you walk away from this webinar today knowing your rights in 3 main areas: the home, the workplace, and while driving. So I'm going to now pass it over to Amina to talk about what to do if ICE comes to your house.
So before I answer that question, I just want to point out that everyone living and working in the U.S., regardless of their immigration status, has certain rights under the Constitution. And so if you encounter ICE agents, it's important that you know and exercise your rights so that you can protect yourself from being arrested or detained. Some of the rights that we're going to talk about today are your Fourth Amendment rights, which is the right to refusal of unlawful search and seizures, your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and right for an attorney. And then, so these rights apply to all people that live in the US, including undocumented immigrants. So to apply these rights to the first question that was asked is, what do you do if ICE comes to your house? My first advice would be that you should stay calm and do not open the door. Remember when I mentioned your Fourth Amendment right to refusal of unlawful search and seizure. In this situation, when you are at home, you have the right to refuse to let ICE agents inside your home if they do not have a valid search warrant. Without a valid search warrant, it would be considered unlawful search and seizure. And so the question then is, well, what is considered a valid search warrant that would give them right to enter your home? And that what you're looking at in a search warrant would be that it's signed by a judge, that it identifies the person that they are searching for or wanting to detain, and it identifies the address that that person that they assume that person is located. And if anything is missing from those requirements, or if anything is misspelled, then that makes the search warrant invalid. Usually, ICE agents will come with an administrative warrant, and that is different than a warrant signed by a judge. And an administrative warrant only identifies a person, and it would allow ICE to detain that person if they see them in public. But it doesn't. That administrative warrant doesn't allow them to come inside your house without consent.
So that brings me to my next question, which is, well, I do have another question actually. So if ICE comes to your door with a warrant and you say they have to have a name on it, can they detain someone in the home that is not listed on the warrant?
They can if they're inside your home. So that's why it's recommended that the person or you, if you're in that situation, to keep the door closed and ask to see the warrant. You can ask them to slip the warrant under the door, or you can ask them to put the warrant against the window so you can see that it's a valid warrant. And if they refuse to do that, then you want to verbalize your refusal to open up the door and say, I don't want to, I'm refusing to open the door. I'm not going to consent to let you in. And I don't want to answer any more of your questions.
And so, Amina, what then would you do if someone, say in your family, opens up the door unknowingly?
So unfortunately, if you're in a situation where a family member or a roommate opens the door and then they push themselves in, because once you even crack the door, that's why I don't even recommend cracking the door to communicate, just yell over through the window. But if you're in that situation where either you open the door and they walk in, or someone gives them consent to come into the house, first thing is to remain calm. Don't resist any arrests. You can continue to try to verbalize that you're not giving consent for them to come in. You want to then record what is happening inside your home. Either you or your relatives get the phone and take pictures, record what is happening. This is where you have the right to remain silent. That's the other amendment right that I mentioned earlier, where if they ask you questions, specifically, what is your immigration status, you can say, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. And they have the right then to detain you if they suspect that you are undocumented or out of status. At that time, don't resist arrest. Just make sure that a family member or anyone in your home will know how to get in touch with you and let them know to contact an immigration attorney on your behalf.
Yes, and so another question I have is, what is the best way to go about after you've seen a warrant, you've seen that it's legitimate, maybe you've seen that your name is on it, what do you do then?
Well, if you see a warrant and it's signed by a judge and it has your name and it has your address, then they do have a right to come and detain you in your home. But in most cases, they would not have such a warrant. Usually ICE, it takes a lot, they would have to go before a judge. And usually they just don't have that time, capacity, resources to get a warrant from a judge.
Okay. And can they search your house for the undocumented individual without a warrant?
Well, if they have been given consent to come into your house and they don't have a warrant, then their consent allows them to come into the house, look for you, search the house for you. And if they encounter other people in the house that's not on a warrant, they can still question those people. And if they suspect any of them to be undocumented or out of status, they can detain that person. So everybody in the house has the right to remain silent. I recommend that you remain silent, but don't resist arrests, and that you, one, don't lie, because they can use that information against you in future court proceedings or immigration proceedings. So, and don't provide false documents.
Okay. And so if you don't have anything else, any other comments on the home, Amina, we can move on to the workplace. So my question to you would be, can ICE detain you or come to you while you are in your workplace?
Okay, so yes, they can, but as a quick note, you should know that the rules for ICE agent must follow in the place of business are slightly different than the ones they have to follow at your home. So basically, like any regular member of the public, ICE can enter areas that are open to normal people. And so, however, they must have either the approval of the business owner or have a judicial warrant to be able to search a place that is closed to the public. So if an ICE agent comes to your workplace, they have to, again, have a valid search warrant if they're going to enter a non-public area. So in short, yes, they can come to your work area, but then it just depends on where you're working in that work area and whether it's considered a private or public place.
Okay, and so what are your rights in your workplace? So say I'm working, at a restaurant or at a convenience store or at my law firm, and what if ICE were to come to me and ask for my documentation without a warrant, without any other, preconceived notion that I might be undocumented? Are they allowed to just come to you and ask you for your documentation?
Well, if you're in a public place and they ask you what they'll ask you for your identification. You can tell them your name, and then you can exercise your right to remain silent for the rest of the questions. Remain calm, don't run away, just provide your name, and then politely ask them if you're free to leave. Oh, hello? I was just saying that you can politely say your name if they ask you your name, and then politely ask them if you're free to leave. And then if they continue to ask you questions, that's where I would recommend that you exercise your right to remain silent. Say, I'm asserting my right to remain silent, and may I leave? And then from there, it's up to them whether they can detain you, and they can if they suspect that you are out of status, undocumented.
Okay.
Now, however, if they haven't approached you, remain calm and just slowly walk away from that situation without looking suspicious or being noticeable.
Okay, and so just in addition to that, is there a way that you can leave that situation, assuming that there's no warrant, without answering their questions? For example, are you allowed to ask them things like, are you detaining me, or anything like that? Is there a way, to walk away from that situation without answering their questions?
Yeah, that depends. So if they have a suspicion that if they suspect that you are undocumented, they can detain you. And it's their discretion, and it's really hard to identify what factors they're considering to make that determination. So yes, you can say their name and not answer any more questions. But then there is a risk that they will detain you and try to find your background through your name. So there isn't a way where unless they suspect that you're a U.S. citizen. So if you are a U.S. citizen, you cannot tell them that you don't have to tell them that you are a U.S. citizen. You can walk away and say, if you're not detaining me, I'm going to leave. And then but I wouldn't recommend being that confrontational to someone that is undocumented. Someone that's a US citizen can exercise their right more in that situation, because at the end of the day, they can't be deported.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to your rights in navigating ICE and law enforcement while driving. I'm going to move over to Rafael Torres for this section. So Rafael, my question to you is, if I'm pulled over or if someone's pulled over, do you have to tell them about your status or your documentation status?
Excellent question, Roop. Thank you. But before I go there, if I can just jump back, there was a question in the Q&A section. And for sake of maintaining privacy, I'm not sure whether the individuals are identified in the Q&A, but there's a question about whether undocumented renters have tenant rights, and a follow-up question about whether landlords, or what if the landlord threatens to call ICE on them. So California has the Immigrant Tenant Protection Act in effect since, if I'm not mistaken, about 2018. And the law basically states that a landlord cannot ask questions about a person's immigration or citizenship status. They also can't make any assumptions based on the landlord's perception about an individual tenant, whether that perception might be, for example, I'm Mexican American. If a landlord looks at me and says, well, I suspect that this individual might be out of status, they can't make any determination about my eligibility to rent based on my physical appearance. In addition, they can't make any of those assumptions about other people that are visiting my home. So let's say, for example, my abuela or my cousins come over, the landlord can't assume that those individuals are out of status or have any sort of immigration issues. So I just wanted to address that.
Just a note too, there is a Q&A section for anyone who has questions if you want to pop them in there. Both of the attorneys can go ahead and answer them while we're talking, or we will also have a Q&A section at the end. I also wanted to say to the person who asked that question, stay tuned to the end, because we do have an upcoming webinar that I think will better address those questions.
Yes.
Did you want me to repeat the question, Rafael?
No, thank you. The question was, what happens if you're pulled over? Do you have to tell the officer anything about your immigration status? And the answer is different depending on what's the same, but we should frame it from the perspective of what kind of officer is asking the question. So if we assume that someone has been pulled over, that's typically done by local law enforcement, whether that's like a police department officer or maybe CHP. Because immigration officers are not empowered with the ability to pull over vehicles for perceived motor vehicle violations. That's a local law enforcement issue. So if we assume that someone is being pulled over, let's also assume that the person is being pulled over by local law enforcement. If that's the case, then we're also going to assume that it happens in California. SB 54 restricts and prohibits local law enforcement from asking any questions about an individual's immigration status. So it shouldn't happen, period. But if it happens, then the driver can simply just decline to answer that question. Respectfully decline to answer that question. Am I free to go? Something like that would be a good answer to that specific question if it happens to be local law enforcement. If we assume that the person is stopped, they're driving and they're stopped, and it happens to be at an immigration checkpoint, ICE agents and CBP agents do on occasion have roving, they call it a field action. And that means that the agents are mobile, they're in cars or motor vehicles, and they'll set up checkpoints. And they'll stop cars that go through that checkpoint and ask questions about immigration status. I've been through many of them, so I can give you my personal experience in going through those checkpoints. I've been through the checkpoints in the same car and in shirt and tie, and when that happens, the immigration officers don't ask me any questions, they just basically wave me through. I can be in the same car, same person, no tie, just in my casual clothes, and my car will be stopped. So we know for sure that immigration officers are performing some sort of racial determination about the likelihood of someone being out of status just based on their physical appearance. So we know that that's true. And I explain this because I don't want people to feel scared or nervous during this kind of situation. As Amina said, I think it's very wise advice to stay calm, breathe, and keep a clear head, because it's possible that the officer has just made an assumption about you, and that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is now over and that you should share your life story with the officer. So let's assume that the person has come through and it's an immigration checkpoint. And we know that based on the uniform of the officer or maybe the labels on the cars. And the officer, immigration officer, asks the principal question, which is, are you a US citizen? Typically what the ICE officer will say, or CBP officer will say. My recommendation would be to say, I respectfully refuse to answer that question. Am I free to go? And I recommend this answer for everyone, even individuals that are perhaps in valid lawful status or US citizens. And the reason why I ask people to do that is because we want immigration enforcement to understand that our community is aware of our rights and that we will utilize our rights in those situations so as to provide cover for the individuals that really do need to exercise that right. For example, if we all do that, if there's 15 cars in a checkpoint and every car is doing the same thing, then that indicates to those ICE agents that they're really not going to have much productive activity in their field activity, in that field action. So it deters immigration enforcement if we all work together as a community. And I do want to recognize that this will cause inconvenience. It's not a comfortable conversation. When it's happened before, officers have brandished weapons at me, and these tend to be pretty serious looking weapons. So it's all about intimidation. It's play acting to try to intimidate the individual to share information that they don't really have to be sharing.
Thank you for that, Raphael. And I think that's important takeaway for someone who might be in this webinar being like, well, I'm documented, but how can I help, right? Because in some ways, having a documented status can be considered a privilege. And it's important for us to use that privilege to help others if we're comfortable, and obviously if the situation is not dangerous. And so my next question to you, Raphael, is just a general question I want to start off with is, can undocumented people have driver's licenses? And if they don't have driver's licenses, can law enforcement question you on why you don't have one or the reason that you don't have one?
Yes, and that's a good question, Root, for many reasons. First off, it is a crime to be driving without a driver's license. So I don't recommend that anyone drive without obtaining a driver's license, especially in California. California has an available program, the AB60 driver's license program. So individuals can that find themselves to be residents of the state of California and can show evidence of their identity. They would need to show either a passport or a birth certificate, some accepted form of identification. The California DMV website has additional details about what kinds of documents they accept to address this particular issue. And then the second thing they need to show is proof of residence here in California. So that can be a rental agreement or a utility bill, maybe a school ID with a home address or something like that. So the first part of it is, yes, AB60 licenses are available for individuals that happen to find themselves outside lawful status, non-citizens. And I highly, highly encourage anyone that is driving and that does not have one to start that process immediately. Arrests, charges, and convictions can affect future possibilities in a prospective immigration case. So we want to make sure that we try to avoid that problem, especially with something that is as easily solvable as applying for a valid driver's license. And the second question that you asked was about the issue of whether the officer can ask me why. It's a really good question because law enforcement officers can ask any question that they want. They can ask me essentially anything they came up with. They can ask me if I've ever been to the moon. They can ask me if I've ever, imbibed in any sort of illegal substance. They can ask me anything. It's important, though, to keep in mind that even though they can ask me anything that they want, that doesn't mean that I have to answer the question. As Amina reviewed, importantly, all individuals that are in the United States, all persons have access to certain constitutional rights, and one of them is the right to remain silent. So if a law enforcement officer asks me, well, why don't you have a driver's license? My suggestion, to not make things more complicated or conflict-driven in that conversation, but just to simply say, I'm sorry, I don't have one. And try as best as possible to cut that line of questioning. Do not share more information than is necessary. For example, I don't suggest saying something like, well, officer, I'm sorry, I don't have a driver's license, but it's because, I'm not in status and I haven't really had an opportunity to go and apply for my license. So, but I really do want to get one. So can you just let me off with a warning? And I promise I'll go get one. Don't do that. Because you have voluntarily shared information with the officer that can give rise to reasonable suspicion that you happen to have fallen out of status. So don't share more information than is necessary.
And just a general question that I have is, if once you say, I don't have a driver's license, do they have the right to detain you in that case?
Typically not. It's driving without a license is a crime, but it's typically not something that is a serious enough crime that would warrant the officer to detain you. Other things can happen in this sort of situation that could result in the officer detaining the driver and or other occupants of the vehicle. And so it's really important that that we stay calm when we have encountered law enforcement. It can be really intimidating. I'm a licensed attorney, and it's still, if I'm pulled over by a police officer, I see a checkpoint, I get a little bit nervous just because it's something that I don't really deal with on a daily basis. So I understand what I'm asking for from our community in terms of using our rights, staying calm. It's not easy. We want to stay calm. We don't want to do anything that would raise the conflict beyond what is necessary. We don't want the officer to feel like they're in danger. We don't want to reach for anything in the vehicle that might give the officer reason to believe that we're reaching for a weapon or anything like that. I have friends who are law enforcement officers. Their job is very difficult. It's a highly stressful job. And so we want to make sure we're not trying to make their jobs more difficult or put them in any danger. We just want to do what we can to make sure that our information is kept as private as possible. So I hope that answers the question. If there's anything that happens in that kind of interaction where the officer feels like they're in danger, it's possible that person might be arrested. If you get into a shouting fest or something like that, that can drive the conflict beyond what is really necessary and can give the officer reason to believe that there's something else going on that has resulted in this sort of escalated conflict.
Yes, and I love that you say that, because even, myself as a documented person, I get really nervous, when I'm getting pulled over, if I'm at a checkpoint, and, yourself as an attorney saying that you also get nervous, I think that would mean a lot to a lot of people. And, kind of what I've been told is, the best thing to do is take your key out of the ignition, put it on the dash, and keep your hands, where people can see them. So that's good advice, especially for us BIPOC folks. And so now we're going to move on into the Q&A section. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A little format. I'm just going to get started from the ones that we've already gotten. And the first one here, either Amina, because you went over this, or Rafael, whoever wants to answer. The question is, if the warrant is not written in a language that the resident can read, can they demand an interpreter or a translated copy?
As I mentioned, there are some things that you have to look at to see if it's a valid warrant, signed by a judge, signed. If they have a valid warrant, they can enter your house and arrest that person that is designated on the warrant. So the question is, if you can't read it and they're still asking for permission to enter, it's most likely that you don't have a warrant that allows them to enter without your consent. So if you can't read it and they're asking you permission, then your answer would be no, regardless of whether you can read the warrant or not.
Okay, so if you can't understand the warrant, your default answer is just no, you cannot enter my house. And then if they have a warrant, unfortunately, there's not much that you can do.
Yeah, if it's a valid warrant, then they can use it to execute that warrant, whether you understand the warrant or not.
Okay. Okay, the next question is, would it be helpful if citizens bunch up at those checkpoints? I'm assuming, Rafael, they're talking about the checkpoints that you were discussing, by showing up en masse and not answering questions and dressing in a way to get ICE agents' attention. So I'm assuming what they're talking about is coming to those checkpoints purposefully, and I guess dressing in a way to get ICE's attention to then, deter those questions, or, answer those questions in a way that's, I'm not going to tell you if I'm undocumented or not.
It's a very interesting suggestion. I would not encourage individuals to engage in any sort of activity to impede law enforcement action. If someone happens to find themselves driving through a checkpoint, then I would ask that you use your rights. It's good practice, utilize it. They are our rights for a reason. If we just simply waive them, it's as if they never existed in the first place. So I wouldn't encourage individuals to impede law enforcement activity or to try to obstruct lawful action. But again, if you happen to find yourself in that situation, then I would ask you to please use your rights in as calm a way as possible. I would also say that don't delay more than necessary. If the officer has told you that you're free to go, please go. Do not engage in any sort of conflict with law enforcement.
Okay. Thank you, Rafael. The next question that we have is, can an undocumented person travel within the United States right now? If so, what do they need? Rafael, I see you nodding.
Yeah, and this is something that I know Amina was possibly wanting to cover. Amina, would you like to take this question, or would you like me to answer? I was
gonna say, since you're unmuted, go ahead.
Okay. The basic answer is yes. Undocumented individuals, non-citizens, can travel throughout the domestic United States. There's a variety of different options to do so. You can travel by car, you can travel by rail. Air travel is also available. If an individual is taking a flight, they should have identification that satisfies the TSA requirement. And typically it would be something like a passport, maybe a passport issued by a foreign country. Those documents can be used for identification purposes. Some of my clients tend to feel really uncomfortable with the idea of going through an airport where they need to show a passport from another country. They feel that that is prima facie evidence that I am not a citizen of the United States, and so can immigration detain me at that time? And typically, if it's a domestic flight, at least in my experience, I don't see a lot of immigration presence when I'm going through a domestic flight check-in, through the TSA. But a lot of my clients feel really, understandably, they feel very uncomfortable with that idea. So one thing that I've suggested for some of my clients is to take a flight out of a domestic airport, an airport that has only domestic flights. For us locally, Burbank. You can fly out of Burbank. It's an airport that only has domestic flights, and that tends to help ease some of those concerns. Again, creatively, I have had clients take train trips, and they seem to really like that. So, alternative options.
I think one thing to consider is that if you're undocumented and you're traveling on domestic flights, if I'm wrong, correct me, but the Real ID Act may, I think when it goes into effect is delayed because of the coronavirus. I think it was supposed to go into effect last year, but it's my understanding that they may need a Real ID Act to travel domestically. So if they don't have one and they show their passport, it just depends on, I guess, if they know any better, to look at whether that their status, if they're out of status, if their tourist visa is expired, right? So there's always that slight risk, and so that's good that Raphael has said that if you, on the safe side, if you are out of status or undocumented, to go to airports that only have domestic flights, so maybe there won't be any Custom Border Patrol there or TSA that are familiar with looking at the stamp in your passport. But and then I've being in Washington, I was living in a small town, and people use the Greyhounds to travel, and I think we're maybe in a town near the border, so there was Custom Border Patrol that were there to check IDs on the Greyhound buses. So that's that's a risk to consider. I don't know how high of a risk that is throughout other cities and other states. But you're never 100% safe if you are undocumented traveling, but generally it is safe.
I totally agree. I mean, it is always a risk, and it's something that, depending on my client's intention, like if it's for a simple vacation and they are traveling to an area or a state that is super friendly with immigration, then that maybe not is worth the risk. If they're traveling to an area where we, from a domestic airport to a domestic airport, we know that that area doesn't have a lot of immigration enforcement, then maybe that outweighs the risk if it's something important, if it's for medical care or something like that, then you weigh the risks and the prospective benefits of that travel. I just checked the DHS website, and it appears to indicate that yes, a passport would satisfy the Real ID Act. It distinguishes between a US passport and just simply a passport. So I do believe that unless I'm mistaken.
Does it have to be an expired passport, and it doesn't talk about?
No, it just says that unless the resident is using an alternative acceptable document, such as a passport or a passport card or a state issued enhanced driver's license, and then it has a long list of other alternative forms of identification that the TSA will accept.
Yeah.
So I think so, but I would recommend that anyone that has a specific question about travel maybe visit with your friendly neighborhood attorney and double check that issue.
Thank you, guys. I have a question that I want to add just because Raphael kind of touched on it, and I'm kind of kicking myself for not adding this earlier, but if we could just shortly, because I know we don't have too much time left, kind of touch on your rights at the hospital, because you did, Rafael, touch on, healthcare and getting healthcare, especially, right now with COVID. Like, what are your rights in the ER, I guess specific to California, but just, kind of generally?
I mean, are you okay if I answer that question? In California, we have SB 54, which is the State Bill 54. That law prohibits ICE activity in certain protected places, and included in those protected places are hospitals. Also included are, and we're going to have a webinar specifically on the SB 54 issues, so stay tuned for that. Yes, hospitals are included, courts are included. If I'm not mistaken, local libraries, locations where you would receive public services are protected against ICE activity. It doesn't mean that ICE cannot be present in those areas. It just means that they need to be a certain distance away from that area, and they cannot impede access to those services. There's a lot of issues previously with regards to ICE activity in local courtrooms, where ICE would be present in a courtroom and try to arrest people as they were leaving, and those are the kinds of situations that gave rise to the passage of the SB 54 bill.
Okay, thank you. The next question here, I guess, is kind of a general question. I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer this, but we have a question that is just asking, is ICE still conducting raids? I guess the short answer would kind of be yes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we can say. I guess maybe to go more into depth, is there a way to know where the raids are happening, or anything like that, or is it all kind of like hush-hush secret?
I can speak to what's happening in Ventura County, and then maybe if Mina would like to share other areas, if you're familiar with activities in other areas. Amina, at least in Ventura County, ICE is active. They are out and about, still performing their field actions. They're still detaining individuals, they're still running checkpoints. So at least in Ventura County, specifically Simi Valley, Moore Park, Thousand Oaks, Oxnard, these are all areas that have had ICE activity. If the question is raid, though, just thinking about it on the second pass, with respect to news that was widely dispersed, must have been like maybe late 2018, raids on workplaces and things like that. I haven't heard of those kinds of activities. But if the question was raid with regards to just ICE activity in general, these what they call the field actions, where they go out and put a checkpoint or just are out, asking people questions, that is happening. So I hope I answered that question.
They may have temporarily stopped raids during the pandemic or have done less, I heard, during the pandemic, but once conditions improve, I suspect they'll be back to business.
And another question just in regards to that, is there a way to find out about ICE activity in your area, or, I'm not sure about SB 54, if that highlights anything in regards to law enforcement's kind of involvement in, notifying people of ICE in the area or anything like that?
I'm not aware of any general resource that's either state or locally run that would notify the public about an ICE action. But I do know that there's some Facebook groups around, there's some social media groups available that specifically watch for that kind of thing. I'm not sure offhand which those are for Ventura County, but they were formed as rapid response networks. So I would suggest that if someone wants more information about that, you can take a few minutes to search for those kinds of groups that are available on your preferred social media service. But those are the only ones that I'm aware of. Those are really public, driven by individuals that are actually witnessing what's happening. There's nothing that I'm aware of that is publicly available, run by local or state government.
Okay. This next question kind of goes with that. If you witness ICE trying to detain someone, is there anything you can do as a bystander?
It depends. Go ahead, Amina. What are you thinking?
Oh, I was busy trying to type answers to the questions that were posted. Can you, what was?
Sure. The question was about whether a bystander can do anything if they happen to witness an ICE action. And my initial feeling is that there's really not much that a bystander would be able to do if the bystander is just simply a lay person, part of the normal public, and has not really had much engagement with an immigration officer. It's not likely to be helpful. The ACLU does have an app that you can download, and you can just simply stand by and record, and that may prove to be helpful or useful, both as a deterrent to let the immigration officer know that they're being recorded, but actually engaging with the law enforcement officer, whether that's ICE or another officer. Again, my overall advice is trying to keep the conflict or that interaction as peaceful as possible, as low conflict as possible. So the recording is something that might be useful, but actually speaking to them, if you're not really well versed in the rules and regulations that apply in that kind of situation, I wouldn't recommend jumping in and getting involved.
Okay, we have one more question here, and that is, have things gotten any better whatsoever regarding ICE's activity since Trump left the presidency? I mean, it's only really been a week, so it's hard to tell, right?
It's hard to say. I think that looking forward, I'm hopeful. A lot of my friends are hopeful that this is something that at least the initial indications from the administration are that we may be entering a different phase of dealing with the immigration system, even just small things such as changing language from alien to non-citizen. I thought that was really significant because it drives the message that we're all human beings. Yes, some individuals happen to be out of status, but that doesn't mean that they're less of a person than an individual that happens to be a citizen or lawful permanent resident. So those small things, as well as the larger picture, right? The U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, at least the bill, the proposal that was from the administration over to Congress. If something like that passes, those are huge. I mean, in terms of just the ability for the number of people that can enter the immigration system, achieve lawful status, ultimately that will drive ICE activity down, because the more people become documented, the less need there is for ICE activity. But in the first few days, it's, as you indicated, Ruth, it's been sort of hard to tell. I don't think we have enough data yet to know whether there's been a significant change in ICE activity.
I think, I'm not an attorney, but speaking as a citizen, it's important for us to be vigilant, to be aware of what's going on, in our democracy, in our government, and as allies to speak up for our undocumented communities and, just make your voice heard. Let people know that you support undocumented people, that undocumented people are human because they're often dehumanized. And just support undocumented people in the best way you can, and to hold your government accountable no matter who is in office, because that's always important. Amina, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think it's important to remember that during the Obama administration, there was a lot of deportation. And at that time, he had deported at the highest rate. And then Trump continued the deportation. So if Biden is going to replace his immigration team with prior Obama advisors, the deportations may continue as well. Although I am hopeful, as Raphael had mentioned, the difference here in this case is that Biden has made immigration reform one of the forefront of changes that he wants to push through. And on day one, he met a lot of promises in regards to changing some of the executive orders that affected immigration policy. And there are some big changes to the immigration bill that he proposes that will help benefit many people beyond just the dreamers. The work is not done in regards to keeping pressure on our congressional representatives to make sure that those policies, those benefits that are proposed in this bill to stay in the bill. There's going to be a lot of pushback from other congressional members, and they're going to negotiate, and it's going to look differently at the end of it when I suspect it's going to change. So it's important that we voice our opinions to make sure most of those changes stay in place.
Absolutely, and that's extremely important as to why I say, we need to keep our elected officials accountable no matter what. We need to voice our support for our undocumented community, and we need to educate ourselves, for those of us who are documented, on how we can help them. If that means staying educated on who local immigration attorneys are in the area, if that means staying educated on resources, that you can provide to people, like websites. Raphael mentioned the ACLU, which is great. I know they have red cards and stuff like that. I wanted to see, I know we're actually, it's 8 o'clock, so we should wrap up, but I wanted to see if maybe you guys could talk about the ACLU and other maybe online resources about, red cards and stuff like that, how people can help.
There are lots of organizations here in Southern California that offer help. So I'm just going to highlight the services that my organization provides. It's CAIR. We have offices that service Southern California, as well as offices that service all of California. We have 4 offices, one in San Francisco, one in Sacramento, and one in Anaheim, but that services all of Southern California, and one in San Diego. So you can call my office. I think our office contact information will be posted, but it's 714-776-1177. We can give you a free consultation, and the information you provide us will be confidential. We help with assessing your option. We prepare applications if you are eligible to become a naturalized citizen, or if you want to see if you can apply for a green card, and we help you with asylum, and we help with domestic violence victims to assess whether they benefit, whether they're eligible for any benefits, and in limited capacity, we can help you if you're in deportation proceedings.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know there's still 2 more questions we haven't answered. I'm not sure if you guys could stick around, but is that okay with you guys if we just answer these last 2? Okay.
Sure.
So one of them is super simple. Can the AB60 license be used in other states as permission to drive in those states?
Yeah, I think I written out the answer for that. Maybe I forgot to send it, but if you have a valid driver's license in California, it should be valid in other states. However, if you end up moving to that other state, then when you renew it, you would have to apply for a license in that state that you become a permanent resident for.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is a little bit specific, so please let them know if this might be a question for a personal attorney, but it says, when individuals go to court for traffic or criminal acts, the judge normally tells them that if they plead guilty, it could affect their immigration status. So people get scared and fail to show up for their second court appearance. What is your advice?
I do not recommend that anyone miss a scheduled court appointment. If you have an appointment that is scheduled, you should appear. If for whatever reason this, you happen to be fearful for your safety about physically appearing in court, one of the small silver linings of the COVID time is that most courts are becoming much more amenable to individuals appearing by televideo or telephone. So take a look at the court that you need to appear. If there's available resources for you to be able to appear by phone or televideo, please do so. Again, I do not recommend that for anything other than an urgent or emergency reason that you miss a court date. You have a scheduled court date, go to that. It can become much worse if you happen to miss your court date.
Yes. All right. Well, with that, we've answered all the questions. And so I want to say thank you, everybody, for asking questions, for coming, taking an hour out of your day to attend this webinar. Like I said, this is not only important for undocumented people, but also very important for allies and documented people to gather this information. Not only that, but all of this information is just your constitutional rights. So it applies to absolutely everybody in the United States. And I think if you're going to take away anything, it should be that reminder that all people, regardless of status in the United States, have constitutional rights, and they're protected by certain constitutional rights. And so that's important, especially since I talked about, the dehumanization aspect when it comes to undocumented people. And yeah, thank you all for coming to our very first webinar in our Know Your Rights series with RISE Simi Valley and Buen Vecino. We have 4 more webinars planned, and we hope to see you all there. Follow RISE and Buen Vecino to keep up on our Know Your Rights series. It'll be extremely important, again, for not only people that these series affect, but also allies who should be aware of these rights. Really, everyone should. The Instagram handle for RISE Simi Valley is just RISE Simi Valley, RISE Simi Valley, SIMI-VALLEY, and Buen Vecino is at Buen Vecino, BUENVECINO. I'm just going to go over a quick schedule of our Know Your Rights series. On February 10th, we have our Tenants' Rights webinar. On February 24th, we have our Labor Rights webinar. On March 10th, we have our Protest Rights webinar. And on March 24th, we have our SB 54 Rights webinar. I want to also thank you to our co-sponsor, CAIR California. That is at CAIR-GLA on Instagram. Amina, was there a website you wanted to shout out as well for CAIR? Buen Vecino's website, by the way, you guys, is just Buen-Vecino, BUEN-VECINO.org, where you can find contact information. Raphael, do you want to let them know where to find you?
Sure, you can find me through Buen Vecino. You could use the Buen Vecino website, send us an email. There's also a telephone number on the website. So if you happen to want to ask us any questions, let us know. Our main headquarters is in Thousand Oaks, but we have another, we're active in Simi Valley. I'm here in Simi Valley, and my office is also located here. So if anyone needs anything specifically in this area, then we're happy to help.
Yeah, the CAIR-LA website is ca.cair.com/Los Angeles /.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for being here. Raphael and Amina, big shout out to you guys for being here and helping people, just be aware of their rights. Thank you for, being a part of our very first webinar where we were really excited to have you guys. And again, thank you everybody for joining us today. It really means a lot, and I hope you took something from today's webinar. All right, thanks guys. Bye.